folks. So, today we're doing some odds and ends, folks. We're just going to be learning about, I would say these are Maya notes 3.5, not necessarily 4, but this is stuff that we're going to be using to make our wands. So, these are mostly bits and pieces that are related to things that we've already sort of tangentially learned about. Well, I know I've mentioned the complex primitives. I don't think I've mentioned changing your manipulator, though. So, just going over more complex primitives than your just simple sphere and cube and that kind of good stuff. And then also move, scale, and rotate, how you can change how those tools actually operate, how you can change how the manipulator behaves. And, that's a really powerful function when you understand it at its core level. And then I'm going to show you guys how to make terrain / sculpt, or do some freehand stuff in Maya to make effects to geometry. Like you can make terrain, you could do like wrinkles on a shirt, you could, for sake of our wand thing, do like whatever you want to call it, like inlaid like designs and stuff, intricate stuff. So we'll go over that. So starting from the top, how can you add a complex primitive from the shelf and menus? So we're all familiar with our poly modeling shelf. Good old-fashioned poly modeling. So we have all of our usual basic primitives here. These two are your more complex primitives. You have, if you right-click on this, you'll see pyramid, prism, pipe, helix, gear, and soccer ball. So if I delete this, I'm going to go make a soccer ball, I guess. So there, boom, I got a soccer ball. It's made out of hexagons and pentagons. I also got, I made a dodecahedron, or a platonic solid. I made an isocahedron, excuse me. This is a dodecahedron. I forget. I forget the nomenclature on how those names are generated, but it's a thing. I think it's sides. It's based on the number of sides and then the edges per the number of side, something like that. Also, under the create menu, polygon primitives. You got your whole list of all the primitives you can make. So no need to use this menu if you have, say, your sculpting menu open, which will come up later. But yeah, 2 different ways to get those open. So right-clicking on the poly modeling shelf icons or the create polygon primitives menu, get those complex prims. You're pretty much not going to use them super often. They are very niche in their application, but hey, it's worth knowing that they're there for when you need them. When you're doing things like, this wand project where you're just doing pure creative creation, it's all whatever comes to your imagination, you'll use them a lot more for that kind of stuff. In terms of doing a lot of what we do in here, which is quoting like the equivalent of drawing from life, aka like making things that actually exist, not super applicable to those things. So second question starts with a statement, actually. Move, rotate, and scale are controlled by your manipulator. So the manipulator is the technical vocab term for the the little thing with the colored arrows or the colored cubes that you actually work with in the 3D space. So how do we open tool settings, and then what axis options are there? So we're talking about tool settings, which we actually found out about in our Maya 3 notes. So just like when you go to Mesh Tools, Insert Edge Loop Options box, it opens up in your tool settings. By the same token, if you were to, say, double-click on your Move tool over here, it would also open up options for your Move tool, or for your Rotate tool, or for your Scale tool. So again, if you want to open up tool settings, it's double-click. If for some reason your tool settings are floating like this, you can grab the gray bar and hover over between your toolbar and the workspace, and it will stash them in there. So that's handy to know as well. Okay, so I'm in my tool settings. I'm going to bring in this cylinder. I'm going to add some subdivisions just to make it easy on myself. And whoops. All right, so I have these things called my axis orientation Okay, so what this is which direction does my manipulator sort itself with? Is it following the object's orientation or the world's orientation, or all these other ones don't really matter as much? Components orientation. So what that would look like, if I'm on my rotate tool, okay, and I switch this to world, doesn't look like anything's changing for right now because my object hasn't moved and it's still matching with the world's orientation. So my x-axis, you can see down here, is actually this direction and z is this direction. So that's why if I change this to object orientation, my object is still following the world. But let's say I rotate this back and back like this, switch to my move tool. So the object has been rotated 54 degrees and 21 degrees. So my manipulator is still keeping the y-axis following the object's y-axis and x-axis and z-axis. So I can move it like this and it'll move straight in that direction forever based on how I rotated it. If I come and mess with the rotate some more, it's going to update. If I change this back to world though, you'll see that again my move tool is oriented back to the axes of the world. Now, let's say, given all of that, and let's say for whatever reason that my object orientation didn't cut it for me. Let's say I double click this ring of edges here. So the object orientation is matched with the world. I broke it. I'm not going to go into how I broke it. So it matches the world's orientation, so both of these do the same thing. But what I want to do is move this edge loop up and down in the gap between these two because I want it closer to one than the other. So I flip this into component mode, and I can push this edge loop. Whoops. I got to reset my component. There we go. So it should. There we go. So you can see it's moving up and down, barely tweaking it. I'm not exactly sure why this component is like, well, probably has to do with me freezing the transformations, but whatever. Yeah, it definitely has to do with me freezing the transformations. Well, whatever. You can see the effect it's having. Normally your object wouldn't be broken anyway, so it wouldn't be screwing up, but in general, you guys should be getting used to this reset tool, by the way. Just spam it. Just make sure your stuff's always set back to default. So, our three axes that we're going to work with, and I want to stress, most of the time the default is going to be fine. Most of the time you're not going to need to use a different axis. Most of the time, okay? I'm teaching you this because, one, you might find it useful in what you do for the rest of the week for your wand, but two, it's just to point out for you so that in the future when I say, and now I'm going to switch to my component axis because I need to do, X specific operation, you're not completely just galaxy brained like, oh my god, what is this? So this is more of the reason why I'm teaching it to you. Not that it's going to be, something that you frequently use, but it's one of those things that as you get better, you'll want to recognize when you need to bring this in. So this is one of those wisdom modifier things. You don't get smarter just by knowing it exists. It's knowing when to use it. All right, so I'm going to quickly pause this. All right, so here I have the notes on the soft select tool and the sculpt tool. So on the soft select tool, it's basically a way of altering your other selected tools to do something to other nearby components. So usually it's either in vertice mode or face mode, but if you select a bunch of vertices and say scale them, it'll scale the vertices around them. That's what soft select does. Spreads the effect of your tool to nearby components around your main selection. That is to say, things that you directly click on. Yellow is the strongly affected areas. Red is where it's weakest in its effect. So let me make a new dock here, and let's make two planes. Make this plane 25 by 25, and I'm going to scale this up a bunch, and let's pull it above the grid. And I'm going to duplicate this and bring it out here. Okay, so we got two identical, very subdivided planes, because both of these tools require you to have lots of vertices to get the nice detail. Okay, so soft select is activated by pressing B. Now, it's not doing anything because I'm in object mode. When I switch to face mode, so you can see that if I have this face selected, it's selecting faces around it. That's what soft select does. So if I increase my fall off radius, which is done by holding down B and holding down left click and scaling left or right, so I can scale my effect. So if I pull this up, see how it softly radiates that effect out to other nearby faces. If I have two faces selected, I can pull at the same time in two different spots. Let's say I add here and here and here, so I can start really affecting my terrain in a very specific way. Obviously, I'm saying terrain just because that's kind of what I'm showing you as, so I can make a nice hill like this. If I want to, I could use Shift and Caret, grow my selection. Scale tool, I could scale this in if I were so inclined. Pull it up. Whatever. So that's the soft select tool. Okay, so again, just pressing B turns it on. You can change the size with holding B and left click, and B turns it off. So now you can see I just have those faces selected. Right? So that's soft select. Here, I'm going to select this object. So we have our sculpting toolbar right next to our poly modeling shelf. We have the sculpting shelf. This tool right here is the default sculpting tool. So if I want to open tool settings, I'm going to do what? Now, what do I do if I want to open up the sculpt tool settings? What would I do to this icon? Double click it, exactly. So now I have my tool settings. So sculpt uses a few basic settings. Size, how big is it? That's pretty straightforward. So it's based on Maya units. So just keep that in mind. You may think that these numbers are kind of arbitrary. It's based on Maya units. So you can see I'm sort of divoting this in now. So my strength controls how much I'm pushing down at a time. Now I say pushing down because the third thing on here is invert, which for my case means that I'm pressing down. If I turn invert off, I'm lifting up. Right? So I'm just clicking and dragging and brushing in. We're making some kind of mountainous, I don't know, some bowl here. Let me invert this. So I don't know, we got some kind of naturally occurring basin here, little pond, whatever. Just take some basic water physics and slap it over the top. So yeah, those are two tools that you may use to do custom geometry. Now, why would I show this to you? So let's say I have a cylinder as part of my wand, okay? And this cylinder has 20 subdivisions going up and 20 around it. So let me scale this up. And alright, so I'll take my sculpting tool. It's a little too big. Strength, turn it down. So say you're going for like a natural wood look. That's still way too much. So right now, I'm trying to make it feel more like a branch. Oh, control. Thank you. I'm so glad. Okay. If you hold control down while you're doing it, it will do the opposite of what so if I have invert active and I hold control, it's going to bulge it up. If I have invert inactive and I hold control while I do it, it will push it in. So if you have a lot of let me do it this way. So let's say you have It's stupid how it does that. Okay, so let's say you have 50 subdivisions around and 20 going up. So now you have a lot of faces on the side. Then maybe you can, oops, do some really detail-oriented stuff. Anyway, that's the sculpting tools. You have soft select, just editing your default rotate, move, scale tools. And then you have the sculpt tool, which is all by itself, just how you can edit geometry with a brush. Keep in mind that for both of them, both of those methods, you have, the more geometry you have, the clearer and cleaner it looks. So if you have very few vertices, it's going to look bad. So that's where your insert edge loop tool would come into play to add more loops. That's where extrude would come into play to add more faces via extrude that you can edit with sculpt. So both of those things are going to help you add geometry where you need it so that you can use these tools the way you want to. Questions, comments, concerns on Maya 3.5, aka Maya 4? Okay, cool. All right.